This video is brought to you by Squarespace. By 1969, George Martin understood the Beatles better than anyone. Since 1962, he'd helped turn their songs into records and change the course of popular music in the process. But his greatest gift wasn't orchestration, it was judgement. He instinctively knew what a song needed, and like all great producers, what it didn't. And for me, there's no better example of that than George Harrison's Here Comes the Sun. Today, Here Comes the Sun is the Beatles' most streamed recording, by some distance. A beautiful melody, optimistic lyrics and wonderful performances are all part of the reason. But I don't think they're the whole story. Great records aren't made by accident, they're the result of hundreds of decisions, and I think this song reveals one of the clearest examples of George Martin's judgement. To understand it, we need to go back to the very beginning. Take 9 is the earliest version of Here Comes the Sun that we've been able to hear, released on the Abbey Road box set in 2019. It's just George Harrison, Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr. John wasn't present, having injured himself in a car accident while holidaying in Scotland a few days earlier. Compared with something like Strawberry Fields Forever or A Day in the Life, both of which changed dramatically in the studio, Here Comes the Sun is different. All the essential elements are here from day one. George's acoustic guitar is the heartbeat of the performance. Paul's bass is doing far more than simply outlining the chords, while Ringo's drumming holds everything together. What strikes me is just how complete the song already sounds. George Martin didn't need to change the song, he simply had to recognise what it needed and what it didn't. But if the song was already this complete, why did it take another 6 weeks to finish? The answer lies in what happened to the tape over the following weeks. By the end of the first session, every one of the 8 tracks had been filled. The following day, they returned to the same tape. George replaced his guide vocal with a new lead vocal, while Paul manually double-tracked the backing vocals. There was now no room for anything else. So George Martin created what was known as a reduction mix, combining the 8 tracks onto a fresh reel to create Take 15, which now freed up space for overdubs. On the 16th of July in Studio 3, George Harrison added harmonium onto track 5 of Take 15, after which he and Paul recorded hand claps and additional backing vocals onto tracks 7 and 8. Once those 8 tracks had been combined, there was no going back. George Martin had to be confident that what remained was exactly what the record needed. This was one of the busiest sessions of the entire Abbey Road project. In Studio 1, George Martin recorded orchestral overdubs for Something, Golden Slumbers, Carry That Weight, The End, and of course, Here Comes the Sun. For Here Comes the Sun, he wrote a string arrangement for 6 violas, 4 cellos and a double bass, recorded onto track 5 of Take 15, replacing George Harrison's harmonium. For the Sun, Sun, Sun section, Martin scored an 8-piece woodwind ensemble consisting of 2 piccolos, 2 flutes, 2 bass flutes and 2 clarinets, which were recorded onto track 4. Meanwhile, George Harrison was listening from Studio 2 via CCTV, effectively co-producing his own song.
Walter, look, there! Ice, Walter.
Well, I'm fresh out, but I do have some salted peanuts.
None for me, thanks. Once I start, I can't stop.
Well, right now, let's stop for this next message.
I've often said that presentation matters. You can have the best ideas in the world, but if they're difficult to find or poorly presented, people may never appreciate them. Whether you're starting a business, building a personal brand, or simply sharing something you're passionate about, Squarespace gives you everything you need, all in one place. You can choose from a wide range of professionally designed templates, customize them to suit your own style, And because hosting, security and updates are all built in, you can spend your time creating rather than worrying about the technical side of things. If you're selling products, taking bookings, or offering memberships, Squarespace has those tools built in too. So whether you're turning a hobby into a business or simply creating a home for something you've spent years building, Squarespace makes it remarkably straightforward. So why not try it for yourself and head on over to squarespace.com for a 14-day free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/parlogram to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. For years, we knew George Martin had written this arrangement, but until recently, few people had actually seen the score. But now we can, in this remarkable new publication, George Martin The Scores, by Brian Cahew and Kevin Ryan, the same team behind the Recording the Beatles book back in 2006. It reproduces George Martin's original manuscripts, alongside detailed session notes and recording documentation for many of his most famous productions. For anyone interested in how Beatles records were actually made, it's one of the finest reference books I've ever seen, and I'll put a link in the description if you'd like to find out more. When this book arrived, the first score I turned to was Here Comes the Sun, not because I expected to find anything unusual, but because I wanted to understand how George Martin thought. At first glance, this just looks like another orchestral score. But if you look a little closer, you begin to understand how George Martin was thinking. Every note on this manuscript represents a decision. Most people think that a producer's job is to put things into a recording, but George Martin's real talent was knowing when to stop. Throughout the song, the orchestra supports Harrison's acoustic guitar without ever competing with it. You notice the song, not the arrangement. I think that's exactly what George Martin intended. But when we get to the familiar Sun, 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 Here It Comes section, something changes. Here, Martin wrote a beautifully crafted passage for 8 woodwind players, 2 piccolos, 2 flutes, 2 bass flutes, and 2 clarinets. The arrangement was recorded exactly as he'd written it, and then added to the then empty track 4 of take 15. Today, we're so used to electronic sounds that it's easy to forget just how revolutionary the Moog synthesizer seemed in 1969. It had only recently become available outside universities and research labs, and very few musicians had any real experience of using one. There was no established way of using it on a pop record. George Harrison was discovering its possibilities as he went along. Earlier that year, he'd released Electronic Sound, one of the first albums by a major rock musician to explore the Moog synthesizer. It wasn't a commercial record in the conventional sense, but it showed just how fascinated he'd become by the instrument. That descending note isn't a guitar or an orchestra. It's him using the Moog's ribbon controller to slide smoothly between notes. Today, it sounds completely natural. In 1969, it sounded like the future. So when Harrison came to the Sun, Sun, Sun section, he made an unexpected decision. Rather than compose a completely new solo, he used the Moog to play almost exactly the melody George Martin had already written for the woodwinds. The new part was recorded onto track 4 of take 15, wiping almost all of Martin's original woodwind performance. Only 4 bars survived, which can be heard just as the Moog solo comes to an end. That tells you something important about George Martin. His loyalty wasn't to the arrangement, it was to the record. Imagine spending hours writing this arrangement, rehearsing 8 woodwind players, recording it, only for almost all of it to disappear a few days later. Many producers might have argued for keeping it. George Martin didn't. And once you begin looking through George Martin's scores, you realise this wasn't an isolated example. Later on Abbey Road, George Martin wrote another ambitious orchestral arrangement for the end. Originally, the orchestra entered much earlier, underneath the Love You section, and continued right through to the famous final line. But as the recording evolved, Martin cut almost all of it away. In the finished record, only the final few seconds remain. Once again, he wasn't protecting his own work, he was serving the song. Even then, George Martin wasn't quite finished. Once the Moog had been recorded, the final mix was carried out with one last subtle adjustment. The completed recording was played back slightly faster than it had been recorded, raising the pitch and slightly shortening the song. It's a very slight difference, but listen how brighter and more urgent the release mix sounds. It's another tiny decision that most listeners would never notice, but they're exactly the ones that great producers make. But that's exactly the point. Great records aren't made by one big decision, they're made by hundreds of small ones. George Harrison gave the world a beautiful song. George Martin recognised exactly what it needed and had the confidence to leave everything else out. Perhaps that's one reason why Here Comes the Sun has become the Beatles' most streamed recording. Nothing gets in the way of the song. Not the arrangement, not the production, not even the producer himself. And that's why for me, Here Comes the Sun may be the best produced song the Beatles ever made. George Martin's greatest gift wasn't orchestration, it was judgement. I've only really scratched the surface of what this book contains. There are plenty more stories hidden in these scores, and I'm looking forward to sharing them with you in future videos. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this one, but that's all for this time, so I'll say bye for now, and thanks for watching.